I make the comment in the book that if you seek self-fulfillment, if that's your goal, you're unlikely to find it. If you seek to live a life of service and faithfulness, you're likely to be fulfilled. And I just think that's one of the other fundamental messages of the Bible is see yourself as you are, as a flawed, needy, weak human being. Mm-hmm. But what's God's will for my life? I think what God's going to say to you is, tell you what, here's my will for this afternoon. You do that, and we'll go from there. Would we agree the only truly, fully objective being in the universe is God, A, and B, the Bible teaches that God looks at all of us through eyes of love. And so therefore, is it possible that love is the only way to see someone as they truly are? And I think it is.
All right, well, welcome to the Seacoast podcast, everyone. If you're watching us, hello on YouTube. If you're listening, we are here with Lynn Stroy. And then we have two Jack Hoeys with us today. We have the greater and the lesser. That's what we refer to them in the Seacoast world. But we'll say the older and the younger, the father and the son. And I want to say this is the second time we've had you on the podcast together.
Yeah.
Patrons, if you're watching right now, what's up? I know Josh Mitchum is in a staff meeting, but he emailed me and said he loved this book. He also sent it to his dad, and he got frequent text messages from his dad saying, man, in page 100, blah, 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 said something about what you said and just, had a great conversation between a father and a son. So I thought that was pretty cool. But I do want to tell people that after listening to this episode, if you are a newer listener and you enjoy this time with Jack the Greater, he has been on a number of episodes on this Seacoast podcast, and I think I have a comprehensive list. So in episode 86, Father and Son, we're here to talk about AI and the future of America. Early on, Jack talked with a wonderful lady at Seacoast about Halloween, Jack being... I don't know if I would say pro-Halloween, but he definitely wasn't anti, and the other lady was anti. We had an episode 39 it was part of our miracle series, and you guys assessed some of the miracles that happened in 2019. You did 2 episodes with Shane Claiborne, one about wealth, one about pacifism. You did an episode about Does the Bible Contradict Itself? We had a weird episode about Alzheimer's and economics, and you were on the economics part of it. And then we had an episode called Does God Have Limited Power? We brought on, I think, Thomas Ord to talk about limited, what's it called? I forgot. What's that theology called? God's limited in power. Oh, shoot.
Limited in power?
Yeah, limited in power, limited in knowledge.
Oh, limited in knowledge. That open theism?
Yes, thank you. And then most recently, episode 171 with the CEO of Hobby Lobby. But listeners, I'm going to tell you a sentiment that a lot of us on Seacoast staff share. Time with this man is well time spent. And so sit back and relax and take in what I'll say is wisdom from a very humble yet extremely wise man who really tries to love God and others in a very authentic way. We're happy to have you.
Thank you, Joey.
And it's a very darn good book. Lynn, you got a copy of it. Did you read it?
I started it. I have not finished it, but I did start it.
Do you like how it's sounding?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Jack, did you read the book?
Yeah.
Yeah? Nice. Did you like it?
Of all of the books I've read, it is one of them. Yeah, I liked it. But it's like, I don't know, probably my experience of reading the book is a little bit different just because it was kind of in, iterations over a longer time than I would use. Like, it's not really a one and done because you've been working on it for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But, yeah.
Well, let's get into some fun, more background stuff before we dive into the book. I remember, Jack, the first time I heard of you, I heard this dude is so freaking smart. And then the first time I saw you, it was with campus pastors. And I think we were encouraged just to ask you questions about Seacoast organization. And I don't know if you knew at the time that you were going to be coming on as our boss. I don't know. I don't know if it was you were just there to actually be kind of a consultant to us campus pastors and just kind of have a free for all and pick your brain sort of thing. But I am curious, did Jeff Surratt approach you to tell you, hey, I'm stepping down and we really need to fill some shoes, will you do it? Like, how did that transpire? Because you were the chief of operations. Is that what it's called? COO?
I had different titles. But, when I originally started working with the staff, it was about 6 months before that. It was like the summer of 2010, I think. And Greg had asked me to come in and kind of do an assessment of where things were. And I shared my thoughts with him. I just kind of did a consulting survey. And
I bet you that meeting was a part of that.
And so then his thing was, well, could you come help us do the things that you said we needed to do? So I kind of agreed to come in like as on a 2-day-a-week basis, kind of overseeing the financial side of things. And then 6 months later was when Jeff left.
Gotcha.
And at that point, then I kind of took over everything. And, but, kind of on an interim basis, my goal from the outset was I just felt like I'm a transitional figure here. I need to, build a team and build systems and then get out of the way. And so I ended up, it took longer than I thought it might, but I ended up starting to get out of the way about 2014, I think. And,
gotcha.
Yeah, and then finished my role in the staff 2019.
Gotcha. Jack, I wanted to ask you, you said recently, how should I do this for our listeners?
Mm-hmm.
Just saying Jack doesn't cut it. I'm going to say Jack the Lesser. So Jack the Lesser, you said in a recent episode, and you said it in passing, but you said something to the effect of, people tend to be intimidated by my dad, blah, 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 blah. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people are intimidated?
Well, I think people can be intimidated by anyone who has the reputation of being smart. It's funny, like they're, I think, from my perspective, okay, well, let me just say this. So I tend to be more intimidated by people who can just do things I can't do. So people who are, musicians or, who can do things like act or, athletes, like people who are really good at things that I am very conscious of not being good at. That's more what I find to be kind of intimidating. And so I just think I don't know, maybe you can be intimidated by people that you are aware are good at something that you feel like you're not, and especially if it's something you feel like you're supposed to be. Which is like I feel like the case with I was gonna say I feel like the case with reading. Like I feel like whenever you talk to people about books, it's almost like they almost become apologetic about the things that they read, and it's like, oh, I know I should be reading X, Y, Z, which is not really how I feel. I know it's not really how you feel either about it. So I just think it's like someone is successful and smart and they read a lot and oh boy, what do I have to talk with about this, or what would I would have to talk about with this person? So I don't know.
Do you ever pick up on people being intimidated by you, Jack?
Yeah, sometimes.
Do you try to? I would imagine it depends on the situation whether or not you try to deflate that. Like sometimes it could work to your advantage.
Well, but that's kind of manipulative. I mean,
not if they just naturally feel intimidated. You're not manipulating that.
Speaking of character.
Yeah, right. Which chapter is this in?
Yeah. No, it's funny. My dad had that effect on people. And I think part of it is I'm quiet and I listen. And so people assume that if you listen to them and then maybe you don't respond or something, that you must be judging them.
Yeah, sizing them up.
So I think that's part of it too. Part of it's just that I tend to be quiet,
mm-hmm.
and people always wonder what the quiet person is thinking.
Yeah, what's crazy, and I think about how long I've known you too. I remember when your dad passed away. What year was that?
Yeah, 2012.
Yeah, mm-hmm. I mean that's been a long time ago, and I definitely remember that. Real quick, Lynn, are you intimidated by anybody? Yeah.
Yeah.
You just seem to be the type of, because I realized recently I was like, I don't think I'm afraid of a whole lot, and that wasn't always the case. And maybe someone could call my bluff on it. I mean, roaches definitely I'm afraid of, but as far as people and even like physical fear, like somebody in a dark alleyway or anything, I just don't have a whole lot of fear. It's like if they're gonna kill me, they're gonna kill me. But I wouldn't think of you as being intimidated by people. Is there a certain type of person?
I don't know that I would put fear and intimidation I wouldn't say that they're always the same thing. Like if I was afraid of someone.
It's like someone's pointing a gun at you. It's like, I just want you to know I feel very intimidated right now.
You're intimidating.
That's not reading the moment right.
Yeah.
Well, let me put you at ease.
Is there a certain type of person, though, that you could say off the top of your head, I'm intimidated by a certain type of person?
I don't know that I would say a certain type of person, but I think it goes, for me, the same what Jack was saying. It kind of goes back to insecurity of like when you're around people that maybe make you feel a little insecure.
Are you intimidated by Jack?
There are times when I am. And then there are times but he also, I don't know, part of it is when I came on staff and you were in the office, that's when we still had 729, and you would walk around and come and talk and you would just share stories. And so it's a little different if you're just going into a meeting with someone than if you're actually having a conversation or you did actually read a book. And so you're like sharing the book that you've read or hearing some of your stories. I think your Russian train story is probably the story that like broke the ice of me being like, oh, he's a normal person. That's a really cool story. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Is it off-putting or hurtful when people talk about you in a insinuating that you're emotionless? 'Cause that's like, does that hurt your feelings or?
No, I mean, I understand where it comes from, and I'm kind of, well, I think, well, that's a very complex question, I guess. But no, it doesn't, because I understand how I can come across that way, and we all make assumptions about each other, that are more or less poorly founded.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. Are you nervous about this conversation? Do you get nervous about stuff like this?
Not stuff like this.
Not stuff like this? What do you get nervous about?
The thing that I have to work on, I always have a to-do list, right? And sometimes I look at my to-do list, I think, I'm not going to get everything done at the time that needs to be done. And that's the kind of thing that causes me to feel not nervous but tense. And my challenge is that what I tend to do is just kind of increase the RPMs, go faster, faster, faster. And, and then what happens is I become so task focused, I'm not attentive to the people around me. And so that's something I really try to guard against. But the root is I've got to be more relaxed about the things that I feel like I need to get done. And that, because I tend to put pressure on myself to do as much as I can with the time available. And sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's not.
Yeah. So Rick Warren calls you and says, hey, I want you to teach at Saddleback in a few weeks. Would you be nervous about that?
Well, talk about a hypothetical question.
But yeah, especially hypothetical since he's not the pastor at Saddleback anymore.
I didn't know. All right. So I told Jack the Greater that I was going to ask him this question, and him and I have actually done a whole podcast episode about this topic. But I want to see, off the top of your head, I'm going to ask him who he thinks 5 of the best presidents ever was in American history. Who do you think some of them will be?
Well, I don't know that that's an interesting question for me to answer, because we talk about this
all the time, so you'll nail it?
I don't know if I'll nail it, but it's more like, it's not guessing, it's more trying to remember.
Okay.
But I mean, it's really a conversation if there's Washington and Lincoln and then there's everybody else.
Gotcha. Pretty much?
Yes. Yeah.
So nobody even...
Well, there are other, people that you can make different kinds of arguments for, but I would say all the others have major flaws. Now, I'm not saying those two are flawless. That's not what I mean, but so there are some really consequential presidents, like an Andrew Jackson, but would you call him a great president? I mean, gosh, he was kind of an appalling person in a lot of ways, too. You've got a guy like Franklin Roosevelt, and you've got to acknowledge, hey, led the nation during the victory of World War II, the greatest cataclysm in history. But, boy, made lots of bad mistakes. I mean, I think you'd look at the Great Depression and say it was at least as much due to bad policy on his part as it was to underlying economic conditions. Theodore Roosevelt, a real impactful leader, but again, deeply flawed person. So, and then there are others who were good, didn't make a lot of mistakes, but weren't there during an era where great things were happening, and so their impact was kind of muted. You know? Whoever thinks about Calvin Coolidge or William McKinley, but Both pretty decent presidents.
McKinley was killed, right?
Yeah,
Wasn't
he was
one of them?
assassinated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
him, Garfield, Kennedy, Lincoln were the four, right? Yeah. So you don't have a 5, and that's fine.
Well, like I said, I actually, it was funny. If you look at my Washington, Lincoln, and everybody else.
Yeah. Jack called it. All right, well, then I'm going to ask you specific questions about 2 presidents that are in my lifetime. Give me your quick take on Reagan and Clinton.
I think Reagan, if you said, okay, but you have to name a top 5, Reagan would be in my top 5. I think, again, some ways, I think one of the things you look at leadership and think, Reagan was kind of a limited person. You wouldn't call him brilliant. You wouldn't call him like an incredible executor, but he was a good communicator, which is essential in a president. He was very clear about a couple of things that he had thought through carefully, and he was convinced of the rightness of his ideas. And he was able to draw in really strong people around him who were great executors. So I think Reagan, if you look at people who had a big impact, he would certainly be one of them. Bill Clinton, if you look at presidents since Reagan, I would say Bill Clinton would be at the top of my list. Wasn't a great president, certainly not a great man, but was able to adapt to what the situation required of him. And not many people are able to do that. They try to impose their will on the situation rather than understand what the times require.
Yeah.
And I think he did a decent job of that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I'm pretty sure you share, yes, you do for sure. You share in your book how you can do math pretty well in your head. And I know you can too, because I've seen you at All Staff. There's been a time at All Staff where somebody said a math problem and they said anybody, and you were like, boom. And it was correct.
You know what? 8th grade level or lower. I'm your man.
All right. So we'll have some fun with this.
Oh, gosh,
I've got
I hope so.
2 questions for you. Can you pull up your calculator, please, Lynn?
I guess.
You guess? What a party
Man,
pooper.
U.S. presidents and math questions. You have your finger on the pulse of what moves people today.
All right, 75% of 980.
735.
All right. That was pretty quick. I could do that in my head, but
I was
not
a
that
little
quick.
nervous I wasn't going to do it fast enough.
Right? So you knew to multiply it by 0.75? Good job.
I did. I did know that much.
All right. 372.5 is 25% of what number?
Wait a minute. 372.5
Is 25% of what number?
Of what number? 1,490.
Dang. That's pretty cool, man. Pretty
A little
cool.
bit of algebra in
Pretty
there.
quick. Pretty quick. All right, last question before we get into the book, which you are here for. I want to know, and you can also say, Joey, that's a really dumb question, but here's my stab at it. I can take it. What decade in the 20th century was the most opportunistic for teens entering into adulthood and finding a decent career? So whether it's college or whether it's, going into the workforce right after high school in the 1900s, when was just the best time?
Well, I'll give you my answer, but I would frame it slightly differently. So for teens or people coming out of high school, coming out of college, finding a job, almost every decade in the 20th century was good, with the exception of the 1930s and in some ways the 1940s. But if you said what was the best, I would say the 1980s because of the long trajectory that those kids had. If you came of age in the 1980s, you had really 30 wonderful years of an economy ahead of you. And
Jeez.
Not many people have had that.
Yeah. Up until 2008?
2008, 2009.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. All right. Well, I have read the book twice, and I'll put it this way: if you put it into a leadership book category, which I don't necessarily do, but I think it could fit the bill, I'd say it's my 2 favorites is this and Oswald Sanders. I really, really enjoyed this book, and I think what makes it so special is it's got the perfect. I mean, it's theology and Bible written all over it, but it just feels so practical at the same time. It's like, here's a guy just talking about his life. It's very spiritual, but it doesn't feel very spiritual. It just feels very practical with very good. I mean, it's I guess you would say it's very Seacoasty in that way, but also tons of depth. But I am curious. So I'll tell our listeners, it's definitely autobiographical in the sense of lots of stories of Jack's life shared. But would you think discipleship book, leadership book, spiritual how-to? Because you really do have a pretty thorough, hey, here's how I've been living my life. So it does kind of feel like, hey, well, I can apply these principles. This makes sense. This sounds good.
Yeah. Well, I guess probably the category that to me it would fall into is a kind of called spiritual formation. Again, how do you embed spiritual truth in your life in a way that enables you to grow and, grow in more and more into the likeness of Christ?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. All right. So a little bit of your background in the closing words section, you talk about graduate school and how you really had not accepted or rejected the faith of your parents. And I want to say part of your approach to deciding whether or not you were going to do that was reading the Bible all the way through. Mm-hmm. And you basically said after doing that, you were convinced that the faith of your parents was right on. And I'm curious, what was it about that experience that convinced you of that? Like when you think back on that.
Yeah, so it's funny.
What drove it home?
I took a year. I read the Bible through in 6 translations. I read them, remember the parallel Bibles? Yeah. You'd have 4 translations. So I got a parallel Bible. I asked my parents for that for Christmas to their great delight.
And it had 6?
It had 4, and then I added 2 others. And, the thing, I went into it.
Stressful.
I went into it with lots of questions. And the ironic thing is that the questions that I had really didn't get answered. Because a lot of the questions, I grew up in a very, I'll say, a fundamentalist church. And, a lot of their answers to things like, like the issue of creation and evolution just didn't make any sense to me. But, reading the Bible, where I kind of came to is, those things don't really matter. The question is God real? And I just became convinced of that as I read. And because what I felt like I was reading was, hey, this is all true. It's true in the sense that it's true to life. It really paints human beings as I think they are. It paints our world as I think it is. It provides a very, intelligent, accurate picture of what life is like. And so that's, when I think about the Bible being true, that's what I mean. The issues of did that actually happen? Is that number correct? It's like, those are kind of trivial.
Well, you would say the authenticity of Jesus being divine and dying and rising from the dead is pretty important to the crux of the message.
Absolutely. Well, and again, I just think that the historical support that the resurrection is a real event is very powerful. I think it's, the only way you can argue against it is if your argument starting point is just, well, it's impossible, so it has to have another explanation. If you look at it with an open mind, I think you'd have to say that the most convincing, the most plausible idea is that the resurrection happened in pretty much the way that it's told to us.
Yeah, yeah. So you adopted Jack Sr. and your mother's faith. Jack the Lesser, did you ever find yourself, do you think back and think of a crossroads for you where you kind of made that decision, or do you just feel like you were just always in the flow?
No, not in the same way. I think, because I guess, we both read a lot of history and biography, so this isn't exclusive to me, but I guess one of the ways I kind of think about it is I don't necessarily need something to belong to me. I think it's it's good to go through the process of I need to make this faith mine, but I also think there's a lot to be said for people who if they're not ready to do that, it's you can adopt a faith that doesn't belong to you. Right. And I don't know if that makes sense a little bit, but you can say, I'm going to trust in this thing I've inherited because I trust where it came from. I think that's sufficient for at least a while. And so for me, that's not really what I had to figure out anyway. I feel like because I did trust where it came from, but I never had any reason to question. I think, and maybe part of it is I didn't really have the same kind of fundamentalist church upbringing. My church upbringing probably informed the questions I had too, which is it worth belonging to this group? Because, coming up in a church, because in Colorado, is that a Baptist church? I have no memories of it, so it wouldn't really matter. But when we moved to Naperville, started attending a church that ended up becoming a multi-site megachurch, but it was a non-denominational church. And then we came down here to Seacoast in '94, when Seacoast was still small. But again, another non-denominational church. So I kind of grew up in non-denominational churches, and I've written about this in our Substack, which in a lot of ways are culturally very different from who I am as a person. My soul is basically Presbyterian in a lot of ways. But and so what I had to figure is, do I want to be with this group of people? Because I went to Liberty, and I remember having this, not a crisis moment, but just like a throw up my hands moment where, we had this speaker, I don't think it was Convocation. Liberty had, I don't know if they still do, had something called Spiritual Emphasis Week, which is basically a week long of just like chapel nonstop. And there was a speaker who was telling this really kind of powerful, moving, tragic story of, I think it was a Chinese martyr, right? And speaker ends, it immediately goes into high upbeat worship, and everyone's jumping around. And I just remember being so angry. It's what is wrong with any of you? What are you doing? If someone, it'd be like if you were sitting in your living room and a good friend just told you they got a terrible health diagnosis, and then a commercial you really like came on, and you just started cracking up over it. What are you doing? And that's kind of really how and I just remember having this moment, I don't want to belong to any of this. I was 18, I remember thinking, you people are idiots, and you don't actually believe any of this.
You knew everything at the time, too.
Well, yeah, but right. And I just remember feeling you don't actually believe any of this. You haven't been listening. None of this means anything to you. So anyway, so that was the thing I really had to figure out is, do I want to be a part of the church? Which, I really think it's not really so different a question. In some ways, it's kind of the same question of, do I believe this? But I never really had any issues with believing in Christianity. My question really was, do I want to have anything to do with God's people? And that's the thing I really had to work through, again, kind of throughout college.
Yeah, gotcha. All right, so I will confess that this was one of I wouldn't say difficult, but took the longest time to prepare for of most conversations that I have on podcasts. And it really was because I wanted to talk about so much, and I had to figure out, whittle it down, pick and choose. And so I'll tell our listeners that I've even nudged Jack to not go super in depth with a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about, no pressure, but I would highly encourage you to get this book and dive deep. As much as we're talking about Jack being a smart guy, it is actually very easy to read, and it's for someone like me, it was an easy read. A few general themes, and then we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts, let you tell listeners how you separate it into 3 sections, the passage that everything is hinged on. But one of the first things you talk about that is central to the theme of the book too is how you watched your dad, and I would guess that this is post figuring out, hey, I want to have the faith of my dad. You wanted to be like your dad, and you thought at the time, I can just did you use jacket as an analogy? I can just put on dad's coat sort of thing, and on the outside, I can just be like him. And you figured out, oh, wait a second, this is going to take an inward change, and it takes a lot of time. But unpack that real quick.
Yeah. Well, the example I gave in the book was that, when I was a young man, I carried a lot of stress, and and I didn't like feeling on edge and under pressure all the time. And the way, and a lot of times that pressure, when it came out in explosions of anger, and I didn't like the impact that I had on people. And my dad, on the other hand, was like the most relaxed person I've ever known. And
real quick, I have to know, did you ever know, or do you know, did he ever have to work through anger? Did he have that as an issue? And then,
the problem in terms of trying to get an accurate picture of that is that he was the youngest of 8 children, and in his mom's mind, he never did anything wrong. So that was kind of the storyline. But he had a temper that didn't come out very often. But he was also wired to be much more relaxed. Like I'm kind of more like my mom in that sense, who's kind of like a bundle of tension even today. And I didn't like living that way. I looked at him and I just thought, boy, I'd love to be that person. And I thought, well, I can just become that person. And really what I ended up doing was, my friend was, I was disguising myself. I was bottling up the tension rather than understanding that he was genuinely free of tension. He was, what came across as a relaxed person was he was relaxed from the inside out. He wasn't covering over anything. And so that was kind of like I've got to learn how to do that. I've got to learn how to become that person, not how to appear like that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you even used the words, you can't disguise yourself. Mm-hmm. Like he was calm within himself.
Yes. Yeah.
And you were trying to disguise yourself to be that on the outside.
Yeah.
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 Real quick, Lynn, I'm curious, did you, because you had we'd call it a born-again experience in adulthood, did you ever have lofty thoughts that, oh, sweet, I can just now be a certain person, or did you almost right away realize, oh, this is going to be a journey?
Journey.
Yeah,
I kind of knew that from the beginning because I was a mess when I showed up to Seacoast. So I didn't have any and I didn't have a vision of what it looked like either. So I grew up in the church, but none of the people around me, I can't point to certain people to say, oh, that I would emulate that. Mm-hmm. And so I never had a, oh, I'm going to be completely different.
Yeah.
And I didn't have anybody that I was looking at that I was like, oh, I want to be like that person.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. So Jack, why don't you tell people the core scriptural passage of the book and then how you have everything laid out in 3 sections and what the 3 sections are?
Yeah. Well, it kind of follows onto this idea of embodying, characteristics rather than trying to put them on like you pull on a jacket. So the passage of scripture that this book is really rooted in is 2 Peter chapter 1. And Peter begins by saying, God's given us everything we need for life and godliness through his great and precious promises. And then he goes on and says, for this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, to goodness knowledge. And he goes through this list of 8 qualities that ends in love. And then he says, for if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. And I remember the day that jumped off the page at me. We were living in Colorado, so Jack would have been 4 maybe. And I was early morning, and I was reading through the Bible in one of those one-year reading plans. So it was December, right? 2 Peter's right at the end. And I just remember it was dark in the early morning. There was snow on the ground. I read that passage, and it's like, whoa. I was all about being effective and productive. I was, my late 20s. I was trying to build a career. I was trying to, grow into whatever it was that I had to work with. But being effective and productive, that's a function of what you do, right? But Peter's saying, no, it's a function of who you are. That was just like a staggering thought to deal with. And what I would say is I feel like I have been working through the implications of that all my life.
Gosh.
And so this book really grew out of that. And
did the Kierkegaard quote, is that what inspired the title?
Yes. Yes.
He said, now with God's help, I shall become myself.
I shall become myself. And I think the thing I love about that is, the outworking of the Holy Spirit in our lives is going to look unique for each of us. Each of us reflects God's image, but we do it in a unique way because we're unique people that God made for his pleasure. And so becoming yourself, that's what God wants. It's not like, here's this model that I want everybody to aspire to. In one sense, Jesus is that model, but in another sense, it's like, grow into the image, the divine image that I have shaped you to reflect uniquely. Mm-hmm. In Hebrews 12, it talks about how we should run with perseverance the path marked out for us. Or it says, run with perseverance the path marked out for you. And your path is going to be different than mine because you're different than I am. And your circle is somewhat different and your opportunities are different. So, the thing about all this is, God made you uniquely. How can you grow into that unique person that he shaped you to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Jack, you said one time on this podcast, I remember a lot of things you said. You said that anyone who typically disagrees with your dad, you just assume they're a stupid idiot. Was there?
I remember that.
Yeah.
I don't know if he used stupid idiot, but he's like something to that effect.
Yeah, we all died laughing. I'm curious, was there ever a point in your life, like teenage, where you're like, Dad's so dumb?
Well, yeah. I'm not thinking a lot of teenagers go through. It's like, I'm wrong. I really should just admit it.
Would having Jack as your dad, kind of putting you on the spot here, but one of the most impactful people in your life by far?
Well, I've known Dad most of my life. I do always make a joke when people are like, oh, your dad's so intimidating. It's like, try being 7.
I will say, I remember my dad is so dumb moment from Jack. You were
38.
Well, what I was going to say is you were looking for your first job, and
oh, geez, this is going to be bad.
And you were making some comment about it. It was at the dinner table, and I had some suggestions for you about things you ought to think about, and you just rolled your eyes. And the thought that went through my mind was, okay, you've never had a job in your life. I've been managing people longer than you've been alive, and you know how managers think. You know how hiring. And it was just kind of funny. But then, kind of what I realized was, I felt like the eye roll wasn't as much, you were so dumb. It was, would you let me discover this for myself?
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, okay, I will. Like that was kind of a good, because I was very much that way too. Like just leave me alone and let me figure it out. That's what's interesting in life anyway, right? Is figuring it out yourself.
Yeah.
It's like Jack, my oldest, he's entering adolescence. So there's a lot more of that happening. But like Luke, my younger, he's just contrary as a person. He will take the opposite position from you just to do it. But with the conviction of a true believer. It's baffling. So this morning, actually, just had like the you're so dumb of it. So like he's young, but like we're basically like the boy, you are, it's early, but you're starting to stink a little bit. And so, but also he likes to be like his brother. So it's like, all right, we're going to get you some deodorant and that sort of thing. So this morning, I was like, all right, but hey, before school, go get dressed, go put your deodorant on. And he just looks at me like, what are you talking about? I said, go put your deodorant. He goes, I don't have my shirt on yet. I said, well, yeah, bud. Yeah, right. Like, it's like, what do you mean? And he said, you have to put your shirt on first. And I said, well, it's easier if you don't. And he goes, no, it's not. I said, okay, I've been wearing deodorant for a long, long time. My point of view is that you can do it with your shirt on first. It's just easier not to. And I got the, you idiot. Look, and I was kind of like, buddy, you do whatever you want to do. It's fine. So I'm really excited to be entering this phase for the next decade.
There you go. I'm in the thick and thin. So there's 3 sections. One is character, and everything is hinged on that passage, but this section is taking each of those words one by one. Then you go into spiritual disciplines, and then the third section are habits that you've implemented in your life. So again, a few more general themes and then some specifics. People talk about wanting to know this. They sit you down for lunch and they ask the question that so many of us ask. Jack, I'm trying to find what God's perfect will is in my life. Please, how do I do that? I want to make sure I'm on the right path, Jack.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, the idea of God's perfect will, like perfect will in a fallen world with a flawed person. I mean, I'm not sure how that works, but what's God's will for my life? My answer to you would likely be, I think what God's going to say to you is, tell you what, here's my will for this afternoon. You do that, and we'll go from there. You know, we want to have this idea of this grand purpose that God has for our lives, and I'm not sure that everybody has a grand purpose in the way. To me, that's more of an American cultural mindset than it is necessarily a biblical mindset. But does God have a purpose for you? I believe he does. And yet it's forged step by step as you walk in obedience. It's not, let me tell you the path from here to the end of your life, and so you can see it. It's, you know, if you knew where the path was leading, you wouldn't need a guide, would you? And yet staying close to the guide is everything in the Christian faith. That's what we're really supposed to do, is walk with God. And so, in one sense, it's helpful not to know where we're going because it helps us focus on the thing we really need to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love Lynn as a fella. I'm talking to Lynn right now, guys. Just in James 1, where it talks about asking for wisdom and God will give generously. I never thought of it this way, but Jack makes the distinction. James doesn't say God will give answers, but wisdom. And there really is a distinction there, you know? All right. So Jack, you're quoted in this book of telling your dad a funny little story that some guy basically says, I can't help but think that God has a special purpose for my life. And this person that was saying it was from America telling who? Do you remember? You don't remember this, do you?
No, not this particular anecdote.
Okay. Do you know?
Well, this is like this young American kid says, I can't help but think that God has a wonderful purpose for my life. And the person he's talking to is from a different culture says, well, of course you think that. You're an American.
Yeah. Yeah. So that leads into self-fulfillment is not the biblical standard for a good life. I'd say many people in this day and age, that's their goal. That's kind of how they're taught. And, I thought about you. You're very successful, accomplished, pretty esteemed guy. If you know who Jack is, you think highly of him. The autobiographical nature of this book shows how you have tried, with God's help, to go against the grain. I really love seeing and reading that in your story. It's like, oh, whoa, I need to adjust this certain thing because it's not lining up with what God's good will is for me. Mm-hmm. A couple of aspects of this discussion is you said that a lot of people see the self-fulfillment thing as freedom, but you would say it's freedom not to live in the self-fulfillment mindset. Unpack that a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you how ordinary is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. There's a verse I think it's in Psalm 119. It says, I run in the path of your commands, for you have set my heart free. And, that's a very different way of thinking of freedom than our normal cultural mindset. But I think, freedom is really, when you are truly exercising freedom, it means that you're in a position, you're capable and able to choose the best. And if you're enslaved by something, you're not going to be able to choose the best always. And so that's kind of the distinction that I would make is freedom is an ability to choose the best thing. And of course, to do that, you need to recognize what the best thing is. And that, again, is, I think, where we get off track. I make the comment in the book that if you seek self-fulfillment, if that's your goal, you're unlikely to find it. If you seek to live a life of service and faithfulness, you're likely to be fulfilled. When Jesus says, he wants to save his life will lose it, but he who loses his life for me will find it. He's not just laying out this path of punishment and misery. He's speaking a fundamental truth about life.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and if what you're saying is true, which I believe that it is, as far as the objective in finding out God's will for our lives is not like a future thing, but just abiding with him in the now, that's freedom. Like, okay, I don't have to worry about whether I'm headed in the right direction or making the right decisions. I need to be concerned about whether I'm walking with God.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I had a friend who he was a young business guy starting a business. I was kind of his mentor for the first years that he was in business. And we were talking about some issue, and he's going to think, well, what if I make a mistake? I said, what are you talking about? You're going to make mistakes every day. I make mistakes every day. That has nothing to do with any, and oh, by the way, if you put this in a spiritual sense, do you believe that God is able to honor a mistake if it was made, in integrity and with an earnest, my feeling is yes. In fact, I think one of the things I've experienced in life is, I've had good decisions that didn't work out well at all. I've made mistakes that worked out just fine. And, God's able to work in the way that he wants to, regardless of how wise we think we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ordinary piece, I think this is probably one of the most difficult eras to live in, because it used to be that fame was just pretty unattainable. It's just like, I don't know how to make a huge name for myself unless I'm super good at singing and get all the right breaks, where now people can literally start an Instagram account and strike out, if they do the right things, they can maybe blow up and get millions of followers. And so ordinary is something that, especially the younger generation, but I'd say it's pretty much affects us all. Nobody wants to be ordinary.
Yeah. Well, that's that's just one of the fundamentally countercultural things about Christianity. And it's what talking there, what the philosopher Charles Taylor calls the celebration of ordinary life, that it's those things that end up providing meaning. I'll turn 70 this year. And so, I look at my family and I just think, did I have a perspective when I was in my 20s about how the time I invested in my family was going to be more important over the long trajectory of my life than what I did at work today, or what I did at work this year, or whether I got the promotion, or whatever it was, And I just think that's the thing that you realize as you go through life, is that the things that glitter aren't always golden.
Yeah. Yeah. I do feel like there's certain things you struggle with, especially pertaining to faith, where the struggle feels kind of over. It's like, I used to struggle with that. I don't really anymore. I've got a new set of struggles.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm almost done with the struggle of wanting anything more than ordinary. Like, wanting, higher status or more followers, or, that definitely was something that I had to struggle through. And I kind of feel like I just don't even care about any of that kind of stuff anymore. Did y'all ever struggle with that, Lynn and Jack, as far as just, everybody wants to be a rock star to some degree?
Yeah, I think I don't know. Well, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Jack?
Yeah, well, in some ways I feel like I'm still in it. But I think one of the things that helps me is just the self-awareness that, like, if I got famous, I'd hate it so much.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it'd just be so miserable. Like, my ideal is to walk into a room, be aware that everyone in there respects me, but have no one talk to me. That's the ideal.
Everybody's intimidated. That'd be the best.
Well, you're talking about like the I don't know, you're asking Dad about, people being intimidated by you, and kind of my joke is like, it does keep the extroverts at bay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which can be useful.
There you go. All right. So, understanding character, the first section, it goes through each of those words that Peter is encouraging to build upon. And in the faith section, Jack, you talked about the experience of losing your company, and some of this you just flat out came right out and said, but maybe some of these things that I'm about to say is stretching it a little bit, but it doesn't sound like you ever got to a place where you were fully thankful for that time. In most ways, it sounds like you have a hard time finding purpose in having that experience. And when you talk about this, Jack, as far as like, I don't know really the purpose. And again, you can speak for yourself, but this reminds me of 1 Peter chapter 1, when he's talking about grief of all kinds, and he says they've come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed, which to me says two things. First of all, the strength of our faith is one of the most important things that we can have. So going through any trials, if it strengthens our faith, that's a good thing. But it also, I don't exactly know what good it is for the result in praise and glory and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed as far as the tangible goodness, but I do believe that the suffering that we do will have eternal implications on our behalf, like in a good way.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that's one of the things, I think one of the things I would say about you're kind of, what you're kind of expressing is my, in the book I talk about, that loss and how I don't look at it and say, oh, I'm so happy that happened. That was so wonderful. It was like now I see I don't see all the purpose. That doesn't mean it's not there. It's just that it's just something that I continue to have to take on faith in some ways. And I think your insight though, what Peter talks about there, like one of the things that is just, I don't really understand is that it's like our faith just seems like to be profoundly important to God, more important than I think I really understand why. And maybe that too is something that we'll all one day fully understand. It's expressed in the Bible. I don't really understand it. But, again, I just think that one of the things that we're eager always to find answers. We don't like to have things unresolved. When something bad happens, we want to be able to assign a good purpose to it. And I just don't know that we have that insight all the time. I don't feel comfortable sometimes with slapping labels on things just so we feel better about them. And
that's what you came to grips with losing your company. You don't really have a perfect explanation for, now I understand why God did that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that you wrestle with in a time like that is well-meaning people trying to encourage you, saying things that are just like drive you crazy, like God just has a better purpose. Really? And you know that. Tell me where that's written. God never wastes anything. Well, that's crazy. God wastes things all the time. Waste isn't a concept that applies to God, because there's nothing God is ever in need of. And so from our point of view, there can be things that are enormously wasteful, but they're for the sake of something that we don't fully understand.
Mm.
And I just think, again, that's part of the walk of faith. There are things that we never fully understand, and we're better off acknowledging that and living in light of that than trying to put a label on it.
I mean, would you even, and I'm totally fine if you're like, I'm not even comfortable with that, but what about if the full purpose of you losing your company was just God making you stronger and more faith?
It may well have been. It may well have been, And then it will be interesting to see. And Lord, did I grow in the way that you intended in giving me this opportunity to grow? Because sometimes I would, I think I would wonder, was there something that I missed then? Did it have the purpose that you did? Because I think sometimes we look at, God working out his purposes in our lives, but there's always this component of, but we have to say yes to whatever the trial is, and whether we've fully said yes in a way that's without reservations. I mean, that's a pretty high standard. Can we be self-aware enough even to know? And anyway, I guess the more I go through life, the more I am inclined to just a view of humility about the limits of what I can know and the limits of what we can fully understand of what God's purposes are. And so then it gets back to what you were talking about earlier, this issue of, as it says in Hebrews, and it's actually a quote from Psalm 95, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart. And that's the thing, I think, as you point out, a lot of the book centers on spiritual disciplines and what I call life habits, ways to try to develop these qualities of character in our lives and try to embed them. And I just think there's this constant struggle that we have. We are always in a posture of hardening our hearts. And so not having hearts that are responsive to what God wants us to see and do and think and even feel. And so that to me is the purpose of a lot of this, is to try to maintain a responsive heart. Like, that's the most important aspect of how you walk through your days, is, do you have a responsive heart? Are you listening?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, knowledge section. I thought this was so interesting, and it was because I had never heard this articulated, and yet I'm reading and I'm like, oh, that sounds like me. Like, I feel the older I get in my faith, the more free, disentangled I feel, the more loved I feel, the closer I feel closer to God, and yet I feel more confused than probably ever, more questions than ever. And you said something to the effect that a lot of, and I don't think you were making like a general observation of everyone, but a lot of seasoned Christians reflect on a day in their youth where faith just seemed a lot easier. And I want to say that led into a discussion about why, or the fact that God trains us to be able to walk in the dark in times where we don't even hear his voice.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think a lot of people would be like, well, yeah, of course, we all have that question. But you really think about it, it's like, why? Like, I mean, the one thing that would be nice to always have is a sense of God's presence. God doesn't promise he's going to take us out of trials or take us out of tempting situations, but God, man, just show us you're with us. Like, help us to feel your presence. It just seems like that'd be a win.
Yeah. And, and instead, what he sometimes asks us to do is believe that I'm present, though you're not going to feel it. And, again, I just think part of this whole issue of, growing in wisdom, growing in maturity. The example I use is, if you have a 6-month-old and mom leaves the room, the baby's likely to panic, right? It's natural. If the child was 16 and that happened, that would not be natural. That would not be healthy, right? Like, one of the things about parenting is for a child to grow and flourish as an independent, mature, well-adjusted adult, they need more distance ultimately from their parents. And that distance has to be established over time. They're going to go further and further away if they're healthy and flourishing. And I do think that there's a spiritual analogy there, that if God wants us to mature, then part of what we've got to, we think that always means drawing closer to him, and in a sense it certainly does. But I think there's also an aspect where we've got to be able to know that we're his, even when we don't feel his immediate presence. And that, again, kind of points out what we were talking about earlier, like the importance of faith to God. If I could always feel God's presence, I wouldn't need as much faith, would I?
Right. Very true. Jack and Lynn, we're going to get into suffering and perseverance. And as people who are closer to my age, do you guys feel that, well, this would apply to anybody, even someone our parents' age, but do y'all feel like as you journey more time in your Christian faith, you're more equipped for suffering? And that's not to say that you don't encounter something where you just feel completely like, oh my gosh, I didn't expect this, I'm at a complete loss. But as a general rule of thumb, do you feel that you're more prepared for suffering because of the suffering that you've endured with God?
I don't know I don't know that I would say. I feel like the further I get down the road, I'm aware of suffering more. But for me, even what I've been struggling with is even the comparison of like, is this real? Like some things, like, is this suffering? Could I really go through what someone over here in this country is going through? And so I think the more I'm aware of it, I wonder. I always wonder, am I equipped? Like if that were me, would I be able to stand in the middle of that?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, wouldn't kind of pushing back? Wouldn't you think though that at least so leave those people in other countries out of the equation, but and in your personal life, wouldn't you use your past suffering and apply what you've learned to current suffering or suffering that's coming? Like, is it a training ground?
I don't know, because I think that like even my past suffering, when I think about, I can't even imagine what I could face, you know? And so like you read scripture and you know that there's going to be, he constantly says, endure, endure, endure. There's going to be something that's going to be so horrific that he's saying, even with the Holy Spirit, you're going to be tempted to not endure this. And so, I look at what I've gone through in the past and I'm like, that does not compare to what I can imagine. And I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. We'll skip you.
Mm-hmm.
Jack, I mean, our tendency is to pray, God, get me out of this suffering. And I want to ask you, because you talk about saying yes to suffering, what does that look like? And I want to throw in there that you actually say you're encouraging readers to say yes to suffering, and you're telling readers that suffering doesn't always produce a happy ending. You know, we always want to say, well, God works good that's kind of our stamp.
Yeah.
Anything bad I'm going through, God will work good out of it, which, you know, we agree to some degree that that's got to be true in some way, shape, or form. But you're saying doesn't always produce a happy ending. So what does saying yes to suffering look like?
Yeah, well, you know, the Hebrews 11, which is always talked about as kind of the chapter on faith, and it gives all these examples of you know, biblical characters, heroes in the faith, and then says, not one of them received what was promised. Wow.
Jeez.
Okay. And you know,
that's right, after the whole list.
Not one of them received what was promised. And so I just think part of what, you know, God's telling us is, you know, again, we know this earth is not the end. This is not your home. You know, we're sojourners here, and our true home is elsewhere. And it'll all be made right then. But for now, we're to live lives of faith and obedience. And we live out faith and obedience through love. And like, that's all we need to focus on. And, you know, we want good outcomes, and there's nothing wrong with wanting a good outcome. And sometimes we'll have wonderful outcomes. Those are reasons for joy. But the meaning of our lives is not defined by whether we achieve victory here.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing that I think, you know, that the overwhelming thrust of biblical teaching is, you know, Paul talks about, you know, taking hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of him. And, you know, you look at Paul's life and just think one of the 2 or 3 most influential people in human history. And yet, you know, if you were looking at him as an observer would you think that his life was a success? You know, as he's in prison, as he's kind of helped all these struggling churches, and he's written some letters. Mm-hmm. And yeah, well.
Yeah. Yeah. Jack, do you suffer well? Give yourself a grade.
No, I don't. Okay, well, that's hard. So,
I mean, because there's a passage that says, take joy in your suffering.
So it's hard for a couple of reasons. One, I don't really feel like I've suffered a whole lot. But what I would say is, I feel like one thing I've noticed about myself is I tend to not do super well for minor to moderate inconveniences, but when things are really bad, I tend to get very calm and focused. And so I don't know what that tells me about anything, but, you know, I think the thing with suffering, you're talking about like preparing, like I was thinking, in some ways it's like, that's how, like because of, you know, I like in 2024, it's like never ending home repairs, like we just never stopped all year long. And because of that, I'm better equipped to deal with home issues that come up. Like I know what to do, but I don't know that suffering really works quite the same way. Like I've got a friend who, you know, his wife passed away a few months ago. And if he gets remarried and then she gets sick, I don't think he's going to think, well, fortunately, I've been through this before, so I know what to do. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That might be true to an extent, but I don't know. I guess, you know, my answer is, I hope I would suffer well, but I also kind of be nice to never actually have to answer that question.
Yeah.
But I'm going to at some point.
Yeah. Well, I also think, you know, part of the experience you get going through life is when you envision, like, what is the worst thing that can happen? And, oh, wouldn't that be horrific? And then it happens. And you realize, oh, well, I survived this. Mm-hmm. It wasn't, you know, I can think of my football coach, like, you know, like, I'm going to die. If I do what he tells me to do, I'm going to die. And he knew that I wasn't going to die. He had a better perspective on that. It seemed like suffering at the time, but actually, you know, there was a purpose in it. And and anyway, I'm not trying to make light of that. I also think that part of the thing is we look forward to suffering. We say, I can't imagine doing that. But when you're in it and you don't have a choice, your perspective is very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'll call this my favorite part of this book. And I really want you to unpack this, but especially in this day and age. And I'll just use Trump, for example. You voted for Trump. You must be like this. I can't stand people like you. Or you hate Trump. I can't stand people like you that you would hate our president. There's just so much. I've got you in a box because of one thing that you said on social media, which probably shouldn't have said in the first place, but you can't put someone in a box. And this just, oh my gosh, it was a breath of fresh air in the brotherly kindness section. We can't be objective about another person unless we love them. Mm-hmm. And I just love how you explained that. Again, people need to read the book for themselves, but give us a little bit of a snapshot on that.
I guess where it kind of comes from is this idea that we think that love means that you can't be objective about somebody. I can understand where that comes from. When we think of like the intense loyalty that maybe a mother feels for her child, regardless of what a murderous thug he may be, right? Oh, he was a good boy, right? So that's kind of the perspective that sometimes we frame things with. But again, you come back to would we agree that if there's a God, the only truly, fully objective being in the universe is God, A, and B, the Bible teaches that God looks at all of us through eyes of love. And so therefore, is it possible that love is the only way to see someone as they truly are? And I think it is. Because if I look at someone and I love them, yes, I can see their flaws, but that doesn't mean I turn them away as a person, because we're all flawed. I can understand what some of those flaws are rooted in. I can see the battles to overcome them. I understand because I can look at someone and understand what they're wrestling with, what they're struggling with. It's why it's sometimes easier to love ourselves or to forgive ourselves for things that we have trouble forgiving in another person, because we understand why we feel that way. Mm-hmm. And so, that's kind of the way
and we understand where we came from, things that have happened to us in our past.
Yes. So that effort, and which I just think is what Christianity is rooted in, this idea of, we're to love everyone. And, that's, again, obviously love is a word that means lots of different things, but this idea of if I can't see someone accurately unless I love them, making that, extending ourselves to love people who are different than we are, who think differently, who may be very unappealing to us, very unattractive to us. nonetheless, I think that's what Christ calls us to.
Yeah. Love it. All right. So in the second section, engaging in spiritual disciplines, we'll camp out on studying the scriptures section. And I loved the passage in Deuteronomy that you outlined, and basically three purposes in digging into scriptures, one being revering God, the second one following God's commands, and then the third one that we don't think about a whole lot is so that we can not consider ourselves better than others. Tell people about that. Like, how does reading the Bible foster number 3?
Yeah, well, because it helps you see yourself as you are and to realize, again, if the flip side of the loving someone enables you to see them, the only way that you can really see them as they are. The Bible helps us see ourselves as we are too, and realize that so much of what we justify can't really be justified. And my neighbor who I'm actively judging over here, I'm no better than my neighbor is. Paul goes through this litany in Romans 2 talking about just the widespread sin, and he goes through this whole list of these ugly, ugly sins, and you can just see people reading it and say, "Yeah, that's right. You tell them, Paul." He says, and then he says, "And you are no better. You who sit there judging another, you do the same things." And I just think that's one of the other fundamental messages of the Bible is see yourself as you are, as a flawed, needy, weak human being.
Mm-hmm.
And once you realize you're just one of the whole group of human beings who are all struggle with that same issue, then
yeah. You close that section out on this, and I'd like for you to explain. It says, like many students of the Bible, I have formed conclusions about many of these issues. However, my point is not to come down on one side or another. I think much dispute could be avoided if we limited ourselves to affirming what Scripture affirms about its own purpose, in quotes, to make you wise for salvation, equipped for good works, 2 Timothy 3:15 and 17. This is the role that study of Scripture plays as we earnestly seek after God.
Yeah. Well, I think what I was trying to get at there was that, a lot of the, I think one of the ironic things about I'll say Christendom, the array of churches and denominations and so on is, it's like we're so eager to distinguish ourselves from everybody else that we center on these little trivial things that we believe that nobody else quite does, and that's what makes us right. And it's like, these are all side issues. Who cares? Yes, I've got my own set of views on many of those things, but they're not the important things. And I just think that's one of the opportunities that we really miss so often is we allow ourselves to get distracted by issues that really, in the scheme of things, aren't that important. Mm. What is important about the Bible? It's not whether it's an accurate document with regard to exactly the scientific process with the formation of the planet or the universe. It's teaching us how to live a life of love.
Mm-hmm. And I love how you highlighted the importance of, at the very least, learning from other believers who read certain things in the Bible differently from you.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of people would, and I almost feel like it's a snare that they're under. Why wouldn't you want to learn that? But to them, it's like, well, I'm reading the Bible right. I don't want to be polluted by someone who's reading the Bible wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think, my experience too, you grow up in a church that has a certain framework and you kind of assume that is the framework. And there are deviants from it, but, and then when you get a chance to read more broadly, you think, wait a minute, this also seems like a valid point of view on this particular issue. And that doesn't mean that what I learned was wrong, but it means that there is more to it than I realized, perhaps.
Yep.
And, I've really been enriched by reading a lot of books in the Bible, theological books, philosophy, a lot of different things that I fundamentally disagree with, but they've helped me to see what are some of the limitations in my point of view, because all of us have a limited point of view.
Yep. All right, so the third section, developing productive habits, one of yours is cultivating a responsive heart, and you shared how you, and correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but you have a commitment to spend time with anyone who requests you of your time.
Yeah.
What provoked you to make that commitment, and has it ever been stressful and overwhelming?
Well, it's funny. It kind of grew out of I remember this really clearly. I was in a quiet time. I was praying and thinking about. I don't remember. It was probably a passage of scripture that provoked this thought. But what I was, I'm a planner, and I've always got my list of things to do for the day and for the week, and I've got other lists for the month.
Are you like that too? By any
No.
chance? Not at all. Really
Mm-mm.
Interesting.
So the thought occurred to me. What if God had something for me to do that wasn't in my plan for the day? How would I find out about that? And what occurred to me was it would probably come in the form of an interruption. And I thought, how do I deal with interruptions? Well, there are things to be overcome, pushed out of the way, right? It's going to get in the way of me getting my plan done. And what I realized was, okay, so if God had something he had for me to do that wasn't part of my plan, I am set up to actively resist listening to God. Whoa, that's not what I want to do then. What do I do about that? I mean, I thought about that for a while, and it was kind of troubling. And that was kind of what I concluded was, okay, so I don't want to take that risk. And how will I know? I'm not going to know. So it seemed to me that the only response was to say yes. If somebody asked for some of my time, I would say yes. And my fear was that I would find myself drowning in a sea of other people's problems. And it hasn't worked out that way at all. I mean, occasionally is some of my time not spent. Yes, so what?
Sometimes when that Joey Svensson calls you, you're like, oh, gosh, it was 30 minutes now.
Well, what I would say is I've, as a result of that resolution, if you will, I've developed a lot of relationships that I never would have developed.
Yeah.
And they've been enormous blessings to me. And hopefully I've been useful in some of those relationships as well. It's been enormously enriching. And yeah, so.
Yep. All right, so leading a quiet life, this really resonated with me when you talked about Jack the Lesser was born, and I want to say that following week, you were out of the house before he got up, and you were home after he went to bed, and you're like, I just missed my first son's first week. And you talked about how you had to place value on intangible stuff, and I relate to that so much because I'm a to-do list person too, and I would always know time with my kids is good, well-spent time, but I'm not getting anything done. I've got this checklist that's not getting done, and I had to almost like mentally commit to the thought that time with my kids is getting something done, and it's the most valuable thing that I could be getting done is just not checking things off my list.
Yeah.
But you had to, I mean, you changed your whole life setup when you came to this realization.
Well, yeah, and there were several components to it. One of them was, if I don't want work to consume my life, I've got to figure out how to put boundaries around it. And so one of the things I thought was, I'm only going to work X hours a week. Doesn't mean I can come home at the same time every night necessarily, but I'm only going to work X hours a week because otherwise I'm not going to have time for the other things that I need to do. Second, I need to find a way, as you said, of making these intangible things tangible. So the intent of spending quality time with my son, that's a vague intention. But if I've got 3 things to do, and in the back of my mind I've got, at some point I've got to spend quality time with my son, that quality time doesn't happen. So, part of my thing was spend quality time with my son is a vague intention. Read to my son every night is something I could put on my list. And that accomplished the purpose. And what I had to do is figure out how do I make these things actionable that I know that I want to do.
Yeah. I'm sorry your dad abandoned you for a week.
I don't, I think I've blocked out that week because I don't remember it.
All right. We're going to wrap this up with working for justice. Jack and Lynn, y'all want to throw anything in the mix before we wrap things up? Like I said, time well spent. This has been awesome. Thank you. You have a practice of not just giving money towards ministries that help homeless people, but you came to a realization that it was important for you to be in their midst. And unpack that a little bit, and then I want to hear what some of your misconceptions were about people who are homeless.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something. Like I think we see this We've seen this in Seacoast's outreach to the community, right? I mean, you look at what the Dream Center has done in terms of people who are living in that community serving their neighbors. It's different than people coming in outside, swooping in to, quote, help. And it's received differently as because it becomes more of a peer-to-peer thing than a benefactor supplicant relationship, which again is inherently creates a power situation, which I think limits its usefulness. So, I've served on a lot of boards, and I served on the board of the homeless shelter here for a number of years, but I also found it important to go serve in the soup kitchen, and because it reminds me again, like the thing about I am no better than anyone else. You go into a place like that and you see people who fit our stereotype of homelessness, right? The kind of the person who's got no teeth and their mind isn't all there and they look bedraggled, and then you'd see people who would look like any of us, and sometimes they're wondering, how in the world did I end up here? And you realize that could happen to anyone. And like misconceptions about homelessness. Like one of the things that most people don't realize.
You talk to people and you're like, I relate to this person. They seem just like me.
Yes. Well, like one of the misconceptions about homelessness is that, well, these people, they don't work. And actually, most homeless people are employed. Most of the people in the shelter, the 180 place, are employed. They just don't earn enough to be able to live independently. And that's a problem that's rooted in some structural societal things as well. One of the things that I learned is a lot of them work day labor. I learned what a trapped day labor is, how hard it is to break out of that and do anything other than live on a subsistence basis. So, ended up working with Derek Snook, whom I think all of you know. He had an idea for starting a staffing agency that focused on trying to help people break the cycle, help people who are in day labor achieve permanent employment. And that was a brilliant thing. And it was had a good run, helped a number of people. But the other thing then that you realize is, and we saw this with a number of the people we worked with, was, and I was Derek's partner in that business. Here are people, they've got 11 problems, and you're helping them address one of them. And that might help them deal with the other 10, but it might not. The other 10 are likely to still be there. They may be overwhelming. And what it just gives you perspective on is how most of us, what we need is not somebody to provide a service or to give us they need somebody who can be like a loving support through life. It's costly that way. It's not scalable. And the thing, what we'd like to do is come up with a scalable solution and we just throw money at it and then that solves it. And it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so many of the issues we deal with are like that. The only way to solve them is life on life.
Yeah. Yeah. And you even go into how just the governmental structures that we live under, there's a lot of good people in government, but everyone's flawed. And then you do have some evil people, and society has to take the brunt of that. Yeah. And you'll have to read the book to hear Jack talk about this, but I love that you distinguish some people find themselves in a homeless situation, and the distinguishing factor was they didn't have community, whether it was church community or people to have their back and get them out of a tough situation. Absolutely
right. I think it's one of the things that if you work in an environment with the homeless, you realize that, the difference between me and a guy that I might meet there is not that he stumbled and I didn't. It's that he didn't have the support structure, so that when I stumbled, there were people helping me up. There were people I could draw on. And not everyone has that. And when you stumble and there's not a helping hand, that's when you tend to go face down.
Mm-hmm. If you're a patron, the first person to reach out to me and say, I want Jack's book, this copy is yours. People can get it on Amazon, correct? The bookstore at Seacoast. Yep.
Or jackhoy.com.
jackhoy.com. We'll have all that in the show notes. And then why don't we wrap by you guys telling people a little bit about y'all's Substack and what y'all talk about, and we'll have the link in there also.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Well, so, I mean, a couple of years ago, in 2023, we started a Substack. If you don't know what Substack is, I hate describing it as a blog, but it's kind of the spiritual air of the blog. But it's basically a subscription newsletter. And so Dad and I each write once a week.
It's called Matter at Hand.
matterathand.substack.com. So Dad and I each write once a week, and then we do a joint post on Friday. And so someone at your book launch event was asking me, so what's it about? I'm like, boy, that's a good question.
All over the map.
We write about a lot of stuff. I'm trying, I try to stay in my lane while also not being too much in my lane, because there are a lot of things I care about that no one else is interested in, and I know that, and that's fine.
Ancient Japanese culture.
No, I talk way too much about Japanese stuff on the Substack. But I mean, I'd say it's like, Bible, ministry, faith. I leave more of the business in kind of work side to Dad. And so, I would say we talk about what interests us and what we feel like we know about. Not super interested in talking a lot about, like, the easiest thing to do would just to be talking about current events all day long. I mean, that's how you kind of grow these things right now. But neither of us had a lot of interest in doing that. There are, 1,000 other people doing that if you want. And so we just kind of, we try to write about the things that we know and the things that we think are important. So it's matterathand.substack.com.
Sweet. My name is in the end of this book, no big deal, as someone.
Well, you wrote it there. I can see the crayon.
But Jack, you did talk about in this book how there's some people that you don't reach out to for real critique. And I thought maybe I'm one of those people, because when you asked me for feedback, I really didn't have any. Did you have some people that said this needs to be improved, that needs? Because I was just like, it's great, I like it a lot.
I had a few people who did, and again, it's just. But even people who said I liked it, like, what did you like? What were the things that were helpful? And
I think I gave you some details.
Absolutely, you did. Absolutely, you did. And in fact, I had a number of readers over the years. And but yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this hour and a half, and thanks for what you've been to me personally, and thanks for writing this book.
Thank you, Joey. I appreciate it.
You've been watching Seacoast Church's Things You Won't Hear on Sunday podcast. You can now become a patron of this podcast and receive exclusive content. Your support goes towards Seacoast ministry efforts and local presence. Also, be sure to leave us a review and subscribe to this podcast so that you get these episodes as soon as they're released. All of this information can be found in the show notes. Thanks for watching.